sure we're recording properly for VOD, which we are as of now. Can't believe I missed a pretty critical cutscene. So sorry for those of you on the VOD. Basically, we met up with Riku, who has found his own weapon, which we will learn in later titles is called The Way to the Dawn, or... actually, in this title, I believe it was called the Soul Eater, suitably ominous, and he has apparently found his own way to search for his friends and attempt to deliver them back home. Sora, of course, seems to have grown rather confident in himself, and believes that working with his Barnyard buddies to track down King Mickey and restore the worlds to their proper form before venturing back off home would be best, and that he can find Kairi, who is at this point still a non-entity, perfectly well on his lonesome.
Come on! Come on!
Now, next time we get a suitably large group of enemies, I want to show off that summon we did at the end of the last stream.
Come on!
The Simba summon, which is, in my opinion, rather useless, even at this early stage of the game, but at the least is pretty cool aesthetically, I guess.
Fire!
As you can see, since we're now able to block, the large bodies in particular are much easier to deal with.
Come on!
Most of their attacks can be quite easily blocked, and thereafter they are rendered totally helpless, kind of. As you see, if you deflect their charge, they just kind of stand there scratching their heads. So, the cool thing... Hold on, we'll show off the summon really quickly. This is a decent group to do it on. There's a nice little animated sequence, which I believe you can disable from the pause menu if you'd rather just get right to the action, but odds are you won't be relying on summons too much anyway. I can't say I've ever seen anybody play with that particular style. And you see Simba gives us a nice little ability to charge up rather powerful AoE and release it. It's kind of a low-risk, low-reward move, I believe. Obviously, you have to stand stock still and can't attack or evade while you charge it, but as you saw, it doesn't take very long to fully charge the Proud Roar, making it useful, I suppose, in very specific situations, but considering the MP cost of a summon, it's, in my opinion, not worth it. That particular summon isn't. There's one or two we'll get down the line that will prove invaluable in dealing with late game content. And once again, in case I missed it, I believe at the start of the VOD, I just want to thank anybody who happens to tune in this evening, either live here on Twitch, you saw a notification or something like that and stopped on by, I always appreciate that, or any of you catching the VOD on YouTube. And those of you catching the YouTube video will notice that my audio levels have finally evened themselves out after I was able to find a pretty creative solution to our audio level woes thanks to the Twitch.tv subreddit, so a massive thanks to all the fine folks who have posted over in that community. Now, if you recall in our last stream, the clock tower in the Gizmo shop sounded, and since our crew doesn't really have anything better to do, we're just going to head off and investigate that. Apropos of more or less nothing. Oh wait, no we're not. See, this is why I should be streaming daily. I just recalled first we have to go to the formerly vacant house in the 3rd District to see a scene with our Final Fantasy friends, but just before that, I'm going to hop around and hit all of the switches in the Gizmo shop. You'll notice that some of these platforms have raised, allowing us access to the top of the machinery here.
Deep freeze! Fire! Come on!
They're intended to take out the green Requiems before the large bodies, but they're kind of such a non-entity even at this stage that I don't really bother. They can get quite nasty in some of the arena battles we'll be getting into later in the game, when they're paired up with particularly agile and durable Heartless. But aside from that, they mainly serve to just prolong some battles that take us too terribly long in the first place. Now, as I've said, there are 5 mage Heartless in this game, and not quite at the halfway point, we've already met 4 of them. The last is a somewhat special case that we'll be seeing much later in the game, and works quite a bit differently than the others. Gizmo Shop is a great place to grind points or EXP, especially very, very early on. Say, just after you make it to Traverse Town the first time, because quite a few groups of mobs will spawn in here every time you enter the shop. Now that we've activated all of those, should perhaps be a chest or something we can claim. Or no, we examine the clock, I want to say? Yes! Since we activated all 3 of the switches in the Gizmo Shop, we received a pair of postcards which could be dropped off at the 1st District mailbox. We'll get to that a bit later on, because if you recall, I think we have half of the postcards already submitted, and the quality of the treasures we receive as we drop those off increases naturally, and the last 2 or 3 are really invaluable. None of the prizes are particularly exciting, but most of them will come in handy either for synthesis or difficult battles later on.
Come on!
No idea why I'm coming out this way. We'll be going back up there momentarily. We're also a bit overdue for a new Keyblade, aren't we? If you remember, we got the Jungle King from Deep Jungle, which is certainly a nice weapon, but a little weak even for this point in the plot progression. We should be getting a new one fairly soon, though, if I recall correctly from my first few times playing through this. So here we're introduced to, formally, to a plot point that's been revealed to us through the villain's exposition, that apparently Maleficent of Sleeping Beauty fame is controlling the Heartless, and apparently destroyed Midgard with them. For no ostensible or discernible reason. Oh, that's right, this is a canon totally removed from Final Fantasy proper. So, in this world, all of our friends here from Final Fantasy 7 and 8 actually come from a different universe original world that we'll be introduced to quite a bit later on.
You see, it's just as I told you. While you toiled away trying to find your dear friend, he quite simply replaced you with some new companions. Evidently, now he values them far more than he does you. You're better off without that wretched boy. Now think no more of him and come with me. I'll help you find what you're searching for.
So, if it wasn't made quite clear enough from the earlier cutscenes we've seen involving him, Riku is elected to work with Maleficent and the cadre of colorful Disney villains and use the power of the darkness to track down his friends and hopefully return home with a bit more dignity and power than he had when he left. This is pretty important for Riku's character development, which I'll discuss at length simply because Sora doesn't have much from my perspective, in that early on, although he expresses it far differently than does Sora, Riku's fairly immature. He doesn't just want to be with his friends, his family, his home, he wants to be the best as well, and he feels that the pursuit of power is a noble cause, even if he tells himself there's this altruistic motive behind it. So he means well, but he has let his personal ambition sort of intermingle with his altruistic intent, which, again, it's incredible that he's such a deep character, relatively, in this type of game. And as I've said time and again, the way he's written, the way his character develops, it's almost as if he's the real protagonist, not the perspective character, but the actual hero who we see grow and develop over the course of the narrative. Sort of the way I've been thinking about this lately, especially as I've considered this project, this streaming project where you're playing these games for an audience, is that since this series is a ongoing collaboration between artists, creatives, and executives from Square Enix and Disney, and nowhere was that more evident than the design process for Kingdom Hearts 1, which saw a great deal of collaboration between Disney artists and Square Enix developers when it came to setting the tone, portraying characters, etc. That we kind of have two disjoint protagonists moving through the same narrative and attempting to resolve many of the same problems. So we have the same world, the same enemies, the same obstacles, and all this. But I view Sora, our perspective character, as the protagonist as Disney would have written him in his heyday, in their heyday. Bright, optimistic, sort of without moral fault or complication, but also not very deep. Their story is just one of, well, basically, learning about the quality that is inherent within them. There isn't much growth because there doesn't need to be. There's absolute good, there's absolute evil, and it's like a simple little fairy tale. Nothing wrong with that. Conversely, over the course of the series, Riku comes to embody how I believe Square Enix would have written a protagonist for the same setting. He means well. He does well most of the time. He's incredibly talented. Kind of a superior talent to Sora, but he also has this inner fault, or a series of faults, that are clearly displayed, very overtly displayed early on in the series, and that he needs to attempt to overcome. He needs to grow. He needs to explore this world and learn from it, rather than go around with qualities inherent within himself and attempt to teach and inform the world. I don't know if this is making any sense, but I just need something to fill time as we get back to the top of the clock tower. But that's the way I've grown to view these two characters. And really, sort of the Disney-founded elements of the narrative in particular have always been the weakest for me, because they are fun and simple, and that's what they're meant to be. Square Enix storylines, conversely, especially when we get to Save Birth by Sleep 3D, are a bit too arcane at times, and not good at tackling difficult themes, subject matter, moral dilemmas, anything like that, just because the plot and the cast of characters become so convoluted. So it is nice to have a happy medium. Although, especially with games like Kingdom Hearts 2 that try to separate the main narrative from these fun little Disney sojourns so thoroughly, I wonder if they couldn't have achieved a more complete integration. For those of you just joining us, this is a complex pseudo-literary analysis of a game about a 14-year-old boy with giant shoes and a key bludgeon fighting off demons with a talking duck. So, welcome aboard. Now you'll see, pulling that cord behind the Red Trinity barrier rotated the mural in the... I suppose it's a fountain down there. But if this incredibly obvious symbolism is anything to go by, we need to ring it twice more in order to cause something to happen. Also, I don't believe I ever made note of it, but if you'll recall, when last we were here, after destroying the guard armor, it appeared that our heroes, for lack of a better word, had rid Traverse Town of its Heartless infestation, yet somehow they returned stronger than before. And this is the reason why. Somehow, hidden in this very complex aesthetic contraption, Traverse Town's keyhole has been right here, wide open in plain sight. So, obviously, our next course of action is to head down to the plaza and seal the keyhole, but of course, it won't ever be that easy. By the way, as we prepare for this boss fight and the true conclusion of the Traverse Town story arc proper, I wonder how's everybody doing out there in the stream chat or in the audience tonight? Let us know. I'm just enjoying a break from my extremely intense studies. So you'll see we're poised with the same exact challenge once again. This is the guard armor. And I won't take too long before we get underway. But I do want to point out, this is literally just the guard armor, as it was in our first visit to Traverse Town. Same health, same attack power, same everything. So, in a really significant aesthetic demonstration of character growth and development, showing you how much stronger you've become since you were last here, we can now just totally cheese this thing. We don't even need to destroy any of its limbs because it just collapses. And does something that's kind of interesting. Far more interesting than any actions it took during its original fight. Yes, friends, it's the return of the Heartless Super Sentai Mecha, this time as the more mobile and powerful opposite armor. Just a couple quick notes about this fight before we jump in, so I'm not desperately attempting to rattle off everything I know about the fight as I'm getting just bodied. The opposite armor is, for all intents and purposes, still the guard armor in terms of its constitution. Its hands may have replaced its feet, but they maintain their overall smaller pool of health and weaker attack power. The opposite armor relies more on these broad AoE attacks, like swinging its entire body across a pretty large swath of the arena, and later on begins incorporating some projectile attacks into its arsenal. The same basic principle that applied to the guard armor applies here. Destroy all four of its extremities, then whittle down the torso, which is much sturdier and more capable in individual combat than it was our first time through. Meaning, this is going to be a little tougher, but not significantly so. Now keep in mind, worst case scenario, we do have our healing magic now that we picked up in the deep jungle, so we should be good here.
Come on! Come on!
There we go, that's already one leg down.
Come on! Come on!
As you can see, there's a pretty obvious wind-up for most of its attacks when it's whole. Not necessarily so when it's divided itself into its constituent parts. And you will notice, I haven't commented on it before, I think, at least I don't think so. but as will be probably a persistent theme for significant fights in the future, Donald is already down, and will likely remain so for the rest of the fight. And oh dear, it's already preparing its ranged attack, which you can see just hit us right there. It can use its torso as sort of a cannon that fires a fairly damaging and somewhat sluggish projectile that I believe can be blocked, but I'm not sure if it can be deflected. We're about to find out. Whoops. One more time. A third time. Yes, it can indeed be blocked, but not reflected, rendering this exercise totally pointless.
Come on!
And just like that, it goes down, earning us another ability point, which will be pretty useful, because I think we're kind of at a deficit. There's quite a few abilities we simply haven't had the room to unlock yet, or equip, rather. And the second of the Heartless mecha is destroyed, awarding us with our most significant late-game defensive measure, the arrow spell, which, if I recollect, not only reduces the damage you take while it's active, but also automatically reflects certain attacks like projectiles and the like, or nullifies them at least. With that, our second sojourn into Traverse Town is officially concluded. Sid already set us up with the nav gummy, so we should, in theory, have access to brand new worlds. And indeed we do. Next we will be traveling forth to a whole new world. And one that, depending on who you ask, is either one of the series' most iconic and interesting, or thoroughly lackluster and sort of forgettable. So now Sid abdicates his position as the proprietor of the accessory shop in order to take up his true passion, right? Selling us cheap gummies that we will never use because the Gummi Ship system in this game is a complete waste of everybody's time. Nonetheless, it's good to know he's here in case you happen to be really interested in the Gummi Ship subgame. He does offer a pretty robust stock that changes fairly regularly as you progress through the story. Going to drop off these postcards before we head out, and there's one last order of business we should take care of. An elixir and a megalixir. Megalixirs are incredibly important later on in the game, especially if you attempt certain post-game content, because they allow you to automatically, no, it is refill, completely refill, the entire party's HP and MP pools. This is of import because there is at least one boss in the game that is extremely reliant on magic in order to damage it. Now, I think, I might be a bit early, but I think at present we can go see Leon down in the waterway for one more little present. Alright. Oh no, Leon is gone, so I suppose not. Unless we were to talk to him in the house. Just let me go check the now I suppose it's the Final Fantasy house in order to see whether or not he will give us a certain item, an item that at this point in the game would be really useful. Then we can finally get out of here. Our next world will be a very welcome change of pace because it has a significant focus on combat, I would say even over-exploration, and includes, by my count, no less than 4 boss battles in its fairly brief storyline. And also a secret boss if you revisit it. I want to say after beginning the game's kind of third and final act. What on earth am I doing? I swear this has been my biggest challenge thus far, is just not getting distracted and wandering off from my objective. Anything? No. Okay. Well, what I was checking for was a special Final Fantasy VIII themed Keyblade that Leon will gift you after you progress through the story to a certain point. It is, by my recollection, very, very good for for the point in the game where you acquire it. And at this point, just having something to replace the Jungle King would be kind of nice. But not to worry, I know for a fact we're getting one rather soon. But first, this. Yes, the Olympus Coliseum has begun offering entrance to its first cup of 4. The interesting thing about the Coliseum tournaments, as I discussed them in, I want to say, the last video of the last stream, something like that, is that they offer you unique opportunities to participate in battles and gain equipment that you could not anywhere else. Now, since Sid retrofitted our Gummi Ship with a couple upgrades, we are now able to warp directly to worlds we have visited previously, meaning that we no longer have to go through all the hassle of playing that terrible, terrible 3D shooter. At least on subsequent visits to worlds. The first time, we've still got to do it the old-fashioned way. So we're going to pop over here and participate in the Phil Cup. You can check the rankings if you would so like, and notice that Phil has already entered on your behalf. So, good thing we showed up. We could stop in to just kind of get that one line of dialogue from Hercules, who has a very minimal presence in this game. And now we get to the meat and potatoes of the Coliseum, the tournaments themselves. I absolutely adore these, you guys, because we get to see configurations of enemies that we would not be able to anywhere else. There is only one world that does not see its unique Heartless participate in the Coliseum tournaments at some time or another, and they are a really great way of testing your party's mettle and your command of the game's core combat mechanics. Now, since this is the first tournament, the Phil Cup is not going to be anything too crazy. Just 9 waves of pretty standard Heartless with a tame boss for us to fight through in exchange for a middling reward. Now that I say that, watch me proceed to get absolutely wrecked in the first couple of rounds. So this first seed is nothing special, just soldiers and deep jungle soldiers, essentially. Just soften them up with some magic, and we are home free, without taking a scratch. Except for the NPCs, who we just kind of take it as gospel that they'll wander blindly into any attack thrown their way. Speaking of this round, so we're going to be under constant magical assault. You can afford to leave the Requiems for last, as usual, because their brethren are so fragile, they're unlikely to take more than a couple of hits. The only issue here really is just the sheer magical Lucian we've got to put up with.
Not bad, huh?
Now we see one of those unique encounters I talked about, the hammer legs, a constituent part of the guard armor, and surprisingly represented here with the color scheme, or near the color scheme, of the guard armor in the original Kingdom Hearts. Fun fact, this actually comes from a totally separate enemy that appears only in these Coliseum battles, known, I believe in the original run, as the Red Armor. It's a slightly lighter shade than the guard armor was in Kingdom Hearts 1.
Nothing to it.
Guard armor originally had, well, you can look it up online easily, but it had more of a plum tint. These rounds could be just a little annoying for me, A, because I can't dodge or like block attacks to save my life, and B, because there's just going to be attacks coming out everywhere. Obviously, once you thin the herd a little bit, the Mage Heartless put up very little in the way of resistance. Once again, nothing too bad here, just clear out the little guys and then go for the big one.
Come on.
By the way, obviously I've been asking questions like this every stream, kind of as a diagnostic, but do you guys like the tone and sort of the focus I've been using for these streams? Do you enjoy sort of the, I don't necessarily want to say analytical, but more serious style of presentation here? Would you prefer something a little more casual? I could manage either. It really depends on what you would like to see. So please let me know again how I'm doing, how you think my tone is, if you think I could improve by maybe being a bit more casual.
Come on.
This is what happens when you get used to working in broadcasting, like radio broadcasting, all through undergrad. So we can see there Donald's one utility. He heals us occasionally. I shouldn't have needed that heal, but, well, as I said, trash at the game. We eliminated the gauntlets very quickly. They're rather pathetic on their own. But by now you should see what this tourney's kind of building to. It's a bizarre theme for a tournament, like especially considering what we just went through back in Traverse Town, but I suppose something nice, simple, and familiar to start players off in the Coliseum isn't a terrible idea.
See ya.
Large bodies may be the easiest enemies in the entire game to successfully block or counter. Just because their attacks are so clearly telegraphed, and many of them just have a ridiculous duration. So yes, here we are against the gauntlets and the hammer legs, and for some reason the power wilds that have kind of served as like just general purpose small fry for this tournament. See, there's actually a bit of difficulty we have to face here, simply due to how hard the guard armor components hit. Neither guard armor nor opposite armor put out this type of damage. And it's probably time to show off our new healing magic. I apologize for having to do that, but it saved us. Now once we actually clear out all of the distractions, the hammer legs and gauntlets aren't too bad at all. I would say the guard armor's attacks are much harder to dodge when it's reduced to its constituent components than when it is a whole. So this time we're fighting the armored torso of the red armor and the battalion of the Hershey Kisses of Doom. And we'll heal one more time, because I do not remember red armor getting quite this much.
Come on!
But sod it, we're gonna make it through. If you can block the large body's charging attack, you can block red armor's whirlwind. I think the trade-off for the guard armor components fought here is that while they have a significantly higher damage output, they're also a bit more fragile. What do you guys think? Did it appear so?
We're the champs!
We get this cheesy and lovely little scene for completing the tournament, in addition to probably the best attack spell in the entire game. Gravity is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Using sheer mathematics instead of elemental resistances or weaknesses, gravity crushes flat any enemy it's cast upon, typically dealing some tech point, or earning tech points rather, when used on flying enemies, and deals a substantial amount of damage, I want to say based on the enemy's base HP. So a certain percentage of that HP will be removed should the enemy be caught in a gravity well. And the AoE on gravity is rather ridiculous, especially once we upgrade it. So, it's minor, but for completing the Fill Cup, we also get this cute little trophy, which will be put on display here in the vestibule. There's also this mysterious chest that appears to be sealed shut. Nothing more we can do for now. It's also possible, by the by, to re-enter and complete each tournament twice more. Our second run through any tournament can be a solo run, where Sora participates without the aid of the always dependable Donald and Goofy. However will we manage without them? And your third time will be a time trial, where you have to clear either each round or the entire tournament. I believe it's the entire tournament within a predetermined span of time. Now, the interesting thing about these second and third run-throughs of each tourney is that you earn unique gear for clearing each. So, for instance, if I was to go back and replay the Fill Cup using a Sora-only run, I would earn a totally different and usually equally unique, or at least valuable, prize. For the most part, these are things like just extra synth items, but rather rare ones. I could do those off camera and simply show you the spoils, or I could go through and complete the extra runs of each tourney at the end of the game. Please let me know in the comments, or stream chat, but comments on VOD, what you would prefer, and I'll attempt to organize my playthrough around that. Now, something to take note of right here on the world map. You'll see that now, despite the fact that we were able to install the Warp Gummi and the Nav G on our Gummi Ship, we still don't seem to have access to any new worlds. Yet. No, rather what we're going to need to do is make use of these warp holes, which, if flown into in the course of a standard Gummi mission, will redeposit you somewhere on the world map. This is, I want to say, one of 2 times in the entire game where these are really useful. They're fun elsewise, but they don't serve much of a purpose beyond this narrative function of putting us in an unfamiliar part of the cosmos. So, audio issues aside, how has everybody been liking streams overall? Like, you think Kingdom Hearts was a good game to start out with, or maybe a bit difficult to commentate over? What do you guys think about this, or about my decision to start this streaming project writ large? Any of you ever done anything similar? And if so, what was your experience like? Let me know in those comments, why don't you? Or moreover, here's a better discussion question. Have you had any experience in your life, like for any protracted period of time, with like broadcasting of any sort? Be that like producing a podcast at home or with some friends, or working at a college or local AM radio station? And if so, what did you think about this? Was this an experience that was overall, like, you think, enjoyable and productive for you, or maybe a bit challenging or pointless? I talk to a lot of media students, like at universities, and you hear kind of a mixed bag of both from them, depending on who you're talking to. But there's very few people in that field in particular who just think, yeah, I had an alright time. If it wasn't obvious, I'm just looking for, like, filler for dead air because these Gummi Ship sections are boring as all get out. And also, they can get rather long. And I appreciate the decision to sort of give these sections their own aesthetic style. But it looks, I think I said on the first stream, though you may not have been able to hear me over the terrible audio mixing, it looks very reboot, very like early 90s CGI. And I don't really think that looks good at all, especially for a project that was released in 2003 and then remastered over and over again in the mid-2010s. And, as I've mentioned many times, Kingdom Hearts 2 does definitely fix this, so I've got no problem with the Gummi Ship as a concept whatsoever. In fact, I'm kind of excited to see what they're going to do with it for Kingdom Hearts 3, because what they've shown, what very brief snippets they've shown of Gummi Ship gameplay looks pretty similar to Kingdom Hearts 2's iteration on that mechanic, only a bit deeper yet, so I'm kind of excited for that. As you will see here, though, we have reached our destination. A literal whole new world. It is Agrabah from Disney's Aladdin film. Just a film. There were no others. Definitely not any, like, cut rate, straight to DVD garbage. No. Just the one. It was great. And at no point will we have to acknowledge that the return of Jafar ever happened.
And the keyhole?
The Heartless are searching for it now. I'm certain we'll find it soon enough. So that just leaves...
Jafar! I've looked everywhere for Jasmine! She's disappeared like magic!
The girl is more trouble than she's worth.
You said you had things under control.
Agrabah is full of holes for rats to hide in. But why worry about Princess Jasmine? With her, or without her, surely this world will be ours when we find the keyhole.
We need all 7 princesses of heart to open the final door. Any fewer is useless.
Well, if the princess is that important, we'll find her. Find Jasmine, and bring her to me at once.
Don't steep yourself in darkness too long. The heartless consume the careless.
Your concern is touching, but hardly necessary.
So, really quickly, great little screen cap of Donald there. I wanted to take the time to allow you to experience that cutscene on your own without any of my interjections or attempt at witticisms. For one very simple reason. Well, two reasons, rather. First of all, Jonathan Freeman's performance of Jafar is, as always, very deliciously hammy. I adore his voice work. Most of the villains, in particular in this game, the Disney villains, have great voice work, and all but a couple of them are voiced by their original actors. But secondly, also to observe the mechanic between Maleficent and Jafar. Something I think is really interesting, right, is sort of the way that the villains are presented to us at the beginning as, like, this council, this unified force, and the way we actually encounter them throughout the course of the narrative. Almost totally removed from one another, with one or two exceptions, Jafar being one of those. Despite the fact that he will be only the second, well, he's the first member of, like, the little enclave of villains we're going to fight directly, but he's also the second real Disney villain, disregarding the Queen of Hearts, that we encounter. He seems to be totally on board with whatever Maleficent's plan is, considering the one-dimensional nature of a lot of Disney's antagonists. It's definitely some kind of power play using the Heartless as a personal army, right? Whereas we saw earlier in the Olympus Coliseum questline, for instance, that Hades, despite participating in the meetings in the earlier cutscenes set in the villain's lair, is totally disinterested with this entire thing. All he wants his Heartless for is to rig the games in the Coliseum, force Hercules to face this nebulous, chthonic onslaught, and then finally cut him down so he can take control of Mount Olympus. Hades is totally uninterested with goings-on beyond the boundaries of his world, where he's familiar, or comfortable, rather. And Clayton, while oddly enough not related to our initial cabal of villains whatsoever, worked in much the same way. These individuals seem to have the power to control the Heartless, such as these beautiful-looking bandits here, but they use them to really disparate ends, and some of these characters have grander ambitions than others. I think that's a pretty nice little narrative touch. The humanoid Heartless that seem to be taking place of soldiers in this world, by the by, are called bandits. And I really kind of like the color palettes they were assigned, both in the original game, which was a rather earthy set of, like, blues and golds, or in this game where they were given something using the same colors but typically much more vivid shades and in an altered pattern to appear rather unusually for Final Mix recolors, brighter and more vivid than their original release counterparts. The bandits have a pretty straightforward series of attacks, most of them relying on their scimitar, of course. Of note are attacks where they can do, like, sort of a diving, somersaulting slash, just whipping end over end in midair. And another where they can enchant their scimitar with some type of magic force and throw it as a pretty slow-moving projectile.
Come on!
This isn't a considerable threat in my experience, however. Really, more than anything, the threat here, right, is in the sheer numbers of shadows just spinning about. Bandits are a bit hardier than both Power Wilds and Soldiers were when first we encountered them, taking a good couple combos to bring down. And here we meet another Agrabah exclusive Heartless, the Pot Spider. See any of the ceramic jars around Agrabah City proper have a chance of being pot spiders in disguise.
Come on!
Aside from the element of surprise, pot spiders have precious little to offer us, because they are extremely fragile and have, I believe, just simple charging and diving attacks to their name. I dare say that they're even weaker than the shadows, although that might be a slight exaggeration. Now, we should have gotten a couple new abilities, and yes, indeed we did. 2 of note. I'm rather surprised we haven't gotten Scan yet, which most would consider an essential ability. But here are our options. We can select this special move, truly special in that whenever we have the requisite amount of MP required to execute the move, we can do so with a simple press of the triangle button. In later games, I think these types of moves would be retermed as limits, but at any rate, we have the Sonic Blade, which we could equip if we so choose. Agrabah has a couple encounters in store for us where we're going to need to be in the air quite a bit, and we can't execute Sonic Blade in mid-air, I don't think, so we're going to hold off on this, and instead equip the Stun Impact, which gives us a 30% chance of unleashing a beautiful AoE combo attack that will not only damage enemies, but stun them for a couple seconds. And, let's see, do we want more TP or Berserk? I'll actually go for the TP in the short term because I want to get enough levels to actually, you know, earn Scan. So let's talk for a minute about Agrabah as a world, Agrabah mechanically, right? This is another world, kind of like Deep Jungle, that has a lot of verticality to it, though not as much exploration as either that world or the Wonderland chapter offered us, which, in my mind, is kind of a good thing, if only because it helps the flow of the game at this point. Right now, the stakes are high, we've seen what Riku's up to, what he's done, our villains are starting to become more directly involved, and so putting a bit more of the focus on combat and feats of daring do is kind of advisable in my eyes. And that's not to say there's not a lot to explore in these next few worlds, there certainly is.
Come on!
And one of them, the next world will be the world will be going to following the next, maybe the largest in the entire game. And if it isn't, it's certainly a contender.
Come on!
So as is my MO, I'm going to try to gobble up all the treasure I can. Before progressing with the story, you'll see we freed the magic carpet in what presumably is Aladdin's home. But we haven't really made any use of it yet. We will do very soon, however. You'll also notice that for some reason the streets have been blocked off. Can only imagine that was Jafar's doing. We'll be able to clear that barricade rather soon, but first, it's time for a character introduction.
Who's there? Hello?
Not doing the world's greatest job of hiding, but okay, sure. I think it's interesting that Goofy and Donald, who come from a world that ostensibly has always been a monarchy, actually know what a sultan is. Then again, this universe kind of employs a sort of an all-in approach to its canon, wherein Donald and Goofy, Mickey as well, seem to have directly participated in anything they were ever depicted as doing in, like, a cartoon short or film or something. So, these two have probably done everything and been everywhere by this point.
Where might I find this street rat? Jasmine, allow me to find you more suitable company, my dear princess. These little rats won't do, you see.
Jasmine, run!
Ah, the boy who holds the key.
So as Jafar devours the scenery, he leaves a few more bandits in his wake to give us essentially a repeat of our first encounter in Agrabah. You will see the glorious stun impact there, which just absolutely destroyed not only the bandit, but also the boxes.
Take that!
When you can pull stun impact off, it is a glorious, glorious occasion. Now, throughout Agrabah City proper, you'll see, I think, maybe 3 or 4 of these rather conspicuous, very plain-looking keyholes, which we kind of use the keyblade to unlock, raising several portcullises that would impede progression across the rooftops. This will be important at least until we can remove the large blockade in the middle of Agrabah City. And I know I've said it for every World's music, but I do really, really enjoy the soundtrack for Agrabah's, like, specifically its overworld theme. It's kind of calm and elegant, in contrast to the more bombastic pieces we had for, say, Wonderland and the Deep Jungle.
Take that!
I also cannot properly impress upon you just how much better the entire soundtrack sounds for the HD re-recording. Not to say that any of this sounds bad on the PS2, certainly not, but it was largely restricted by the catalog of digital instruments that developers would have had at that time with that software, you know? Leading some tracks, while obviously not, as I said, sounding bad or being poorly composed, sounding slightly off because the instrumentation just was clearly artificial. Especially the soundtrack for a couple worlds in Kingdom Hearts 2, which thankfully was also remastered. So let me see. I think now we're supposed to go back up to Aladdin's house? Maybe? Kinda? No, guess not. That was just my imagination. So that means it's time to move out of the city.
Come on!
After dealing with a couple more random marauders, of course.
This is it!
There it is! Okay, guys, we are in business. We finally have scan, meaning I can now actually give you an accurate representation of our enemy's HP instead of just constantly having to ballpark it and use vague terms like, yeah, boss, I got a lot of health, you know, more than average, because that's what those are. We will unequip the tech boost, thanking it for the entire 10 minutes of service it gave us, and instead equip Scan and Berserk, just so we can have something using up that last slot. Donald has the room to equip one more ability, and we have 2 very nice selections, either a MP Haste or MP Rage. Now, ideally, we would make use of both of these, but considering as how in this game you primarily receive MP when you deal melee damage to another enemy, for Donald in particular, I think MP Rage is going to be way more useful because, well, you've seen how he performs in battle. Goofy can equip one more as well, either the special move Whirlwind, or Tornado rather, which is very good, and would form the foundation for many of Goofy's special moves and limits later in the series, or Treasure Magnet, which attracts nearby collectibles. I'd say Tornado's more worthwhile at present. We don't really have difficulty with reaching out of the way collectibles that fall from our enemies, because, well, for starters, most of them are just kind of useless crap like money that we're hardly ever going to use, and anything significant come in those nifty little, like engraved treasure boxes that we can quite clearly distinguish from everything else. But enough blathering. Outside of the city, we meet up with the Flying Carpet, who apparently wants to talk to us. and we shall sail off into the desert wastes. Only to find